The River is Waiting is the first book by blockbuster author Wally Lamb in over 9 years. So was The River really worth waiting for? Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, your one-stop, spoiler-free shop for all things audiobook. Now, my book club chose The River is Waiting by Wally Lamb because many of the members of the book club were enthusiasts of his writing. Personally, I've never read any of his books, so I was excited to try out this apparently blockbuster author and see what his writing is all about. I think we were also inspired when Oprah put this on her book club list, so odds were in Wally's favor. I hope this is not indicative of the way that Wally Lamb normally writes, because if so, I am baffled by his popularity. The River is Waiting is about main character Corby Ledbetter, whose name is phenomenal, but unfortunately for me, that's kind of where the greatness ends. The book begins with a tragedy that, honestly, I didn't want to read through. I will give Wally Lamb points here. It was visceral and really vivid and really descriptive, and it was awful. And honestly, I just had no interest in that kind of torture. I'm afraid this is going to be a massive trigger warning for many readers, so I'm just going to come out and say that if you are sensitive to the death of a child, you definitely do not want to proceed with this book. Just be warned here. The death is not actually the focus of the story. The focus of the story is what happens to Corby after that when he ends up in jail. In my opinion, Lamb is attempting to write a book about a detestable character who then becomes redeemed in the eyes of the reader. For me personally, that didn't happen. I will say about 2/3 of my book club, it did work for them. But for me, it was a no-go. We were definitely torn across the board. There were a few people like me who felt like this book just didn't work for them. There were a few people who absolutely loved it. And then a lot of people were really kind of in the middle. Without a doubt, however, the book led to some excellent discussion. We talked about prison, about rehabilitation, about addiction and drug use. We actually covered a lot of serious topics, but honestly, I could have done without reading the book. As robust as our discussions were, so was the beginning of the book with this graphic detail and really intense description. For me, however, after that, this book took a nosedive. There are themes of redemption, remorse, forgiveness, rehabilitation, and they're there for sure. I easily identified them, but I just didn't feel like they were fully realized. I also feel like the majority of the characters, with the exception of Corby and his cellmate, were underdeveloped. I needed more perspective to understand what was going on besides just Corby's thoughts about himself, and this book lacked that information. In fact, if you read the description of this book, in my opinion, what the publisher is selling in no way comes to fruition in this story. Now, before I make my next point, in fairness, I don't know Lamb's other writing, so I'm not sure if this would fit in with his style. But I really think this story could have benefited from multiple points of view. We could have used the perspective of Corby's wife. We could have used the perspective of the family around them, maybe even the neighbors. And we didn't have any of that. We just had Corby's sort of self-centered view of himself. And that to me was not enough to round out what I needed as a reader in this book. I felt like the graphic tragedy in this story was so hard to get through, and then everything else just fell apart. For example, the river is supposed to be a metaphor in this story, hence the title, The River is Waiting. Yet Lamb doesn't really mention the river until practically 2/3 of the way through the book, and it's only mentioned a couple of times. So I had to really grab onto the river idea in order to even feel like it was important, and honestly, I don't think it was. If you're going to hinge the title of your book on a metaphor and then not deliver, give it a different name perhaps. I think the metaphor should be woven throughout the story, probably fairly early on, but in this case it lacked for me. Truth be told, if I hadn't been reading this for a book club, I 100% would have put this book down. In fact, I probably would have put it down in the middle of the beginning tragedy scene because no thank you. Now, I have read books before that are very traumatic. For example, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. However, in that book, it felt like I wasn't just hit in the face with a tragedy from the get-go. I worked up to it and I learned about the characters' tragedies after I was already invested in them. In this case, I didn't know Corbin from a hole in the wall when I was suddenly confronted with this terrible deed and had to deal with it. Like, really, no thank you. I needed to kind of care about the guy first, and I actually didn't. In fact, I kind of never did. I feel like I owe an apology to narrator Jeremy Sisto. He did a great job and he was really well voiced for this character, but unfortunately for him, I had to speed through this book at least double speed because I was so eager to get through it. I couldn't wait for it to end and I couldn't wait to put it down. So, sorry Jeremy, it's me, not you. I feel like the book touched on all the cliches of prison, but honestly not very well. So it really wasn't all that impressive, although it did bring up, like I said, a ton of things in our book discussion. Now, interestingly enough, I did give this book a 4 out of 5. It was really difficult to give it a 4. I feel like Wally Lamb is a good writer. It's not his writing that was a problem for me. It was more the nature of the actual story. I mean, if you can make me have as hard of a reaction as I did to the tragedy in the beginning, then, I mean, good for you. But it just didn't come together for me in a way that made it worth more than a 4. Although I felt like shortchanging him on the rating because of his writing ability felt unfair too. So I think if I had to give the story a critique, I probably would have given it a 3. But instead, it's got a 4 because of Wally Lamb's ability as a writer to make me feel something, even though I didn't like what I felt. Like I said, many in my book club really enjoyed this and felt like it gave them a ton to talk about. I think the tried and true Wally Lamb fans were Wally Lamb fans once again, but for me it fell flat and I definitely did not enjoy this one. And if you enjoyed it, I'd love to know why. I mean, I heard from my book club what was so interesting to them, but I'd be curious about other people's perspectives. For me, again, this was a downer. Make sure you check your trigger warnings because I am serious when I tell you that they are pretty intense in this book. But remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love, so make your own opinion, but thanks for listening to mine. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.